You hear the wind first, an Arctic wind, sharp and insistent, like it's got somewhere to be. The sky over Anchorage is a bruised grey on October 16th, 1972. Before we dive in, do me a favour, drop your location and what time it is for you in the comments. It's wild to think how stories like this ripple out across time zones and continents, all of us connected by mysteries that refuse to die. And if you're into mysteries that don't tie up neat and pretty, you might want to subscribe, but only if you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about power, politics, and the Arctic wild. Most people think the disappearance of 2 congressmen was just a tragic accident. I'm here to show you why that story doesn't add up, and why 50 years later we still don't have answers. Let's be clear, no one in 1972 woke up and said, "Today seems like a great day to vanish into thin air with the House Majority Leader." That's not how history works. The fantasy was that being a congressman meant handshakes, ribbon cuttings, and free flights on government jets. The reality? You're crammed into a tin can over 600 miles of Alaskan wilderness, hoping your pilot's luck holds out and the weather doesn't kill you both. It wasn't a career path, it was more like the last stop on the life went horribly wrong train. No pension guarantees, no glory, no evenings off. Just you, a campaign that never ends, and a weather report that reads like a dare from the gods of the north. So you're Hale Boggs, House Majority Leader, second most powerful man in Congress. Or maybe you're Begich, Alaska's lone congressman, hustling for every vote in a state where your constituents live in villages you can only reach by bush plane. Either way, you're tired, your suits wrinkled from sleeping in hotels that smell like salmon and diesel fuel, and you're boarding a Cessna 310 with pilot Don Johns and aide Russell Brown. The plane smells like cold metal and nervous energy, aviation fuel mixed with coffee and cigarette smoke, the cologne of 1970s Alaska politics. Your breath fogs the window as you peer out at the landscape below. You look down and see nothing but endless, indifferent forest and mountains that have been killing people since the Ice Age. You're not thinking about history. You're thinking about getting home, about the speech you'll give in Juneau, about whether your wife remembered to pay the heating bill. The Cessna 310 isn't exactly Air Force One, more like a flying station wagon with wings and delusions of grandeur. It's a twin-engine aircraft, which sounds safer than it is. Built in 1957, it's already 15 years old by the time you climb aboard. No black box, no transponder, no GPS. Hell, there's barely a weather radar worth trusting. It's 1972. If you want to track a flight, you need a prayer, a pencil, and a guy with a radio who stays awake during his shift. The navigation system consists of a compass, a map, and the pilot's ability to read the landscape. You follow rivers, mountains, and railroad tracks like breadcrumbs through the wilderness. The weather report that morning was what pilots call marginal VFR, visual flight rules, barely. Low clouds hanging at 1,500 feet, freezing rain that turns to sleet, visibility that makes you wish you'd taken up stamp collecting instead of politics. In the lower 48, this would ground flights. In Alaska, it's Tuesday. The thing about Alaska weather is that it doesn't just change, it ambushes you. You can take off in clear skies and 30 minutes later find yourself in a whiteout that would make a polar bear nervous. The mountains create their own weather systems, funneling wind and precipitation in ways that make meteorologists weep. At 9 a.m., you lift off from Anchorage International Airport, bound for a quick hop to Juneau for a campaign rally. The flight plan, if there was one, called for a direct route over the Chugach Mountains, then southeast along the coast. Flying time, about 3.5 hours in good weather. But the weather isn't good. 20 minutes into the flight, you're in the soup. Pilots speak for flying blind in clouds. The plane bounces and shudders as it hits turbulence. Ice starts forming on the wings, adding weight and changing the aerodynamics. This is when flying stops being routine and starts being survival. Somewhere over the Begich Mountains, approximately 39 minutes after takeoff, the radio goes silent. The last transmission from the plane was routine, a position report, altitude, estimated time of arrival, then nothing. No distress call, no mayday, no "we're having problems," just silence that still echoes 50 years later. 1 second you're bouncing along, rehearsing a speech about oil revenues and native rights. The next, you're a ghost story that will haunt Alaska for generations. What follows is the largest search and rescue operation in American history up to that point. The coordination center at Elmendorf Air Force Base becomes a war room. Planes, helicopters, Coast Guard cutters, volunteers, everyone who can fly, float, or hike gets involved. The search area covers 32,000 square miles, bigger than Ireland, more treacherous than the surface of Mars. They fly 3,600 sorties, log 13,000 flight hours, and cover every square mile of the most likely crash sites. The Civil Air Patrol contributes 2,000 volunteers. The Air Force provides HH-53 Super Jolly Green Giant helicopters. The Coast Guard sends cutters and aircraft. Private pilots volunteer their planes and their lives. The search crews work in conditions that would challenge Arctic explorers, temperatures below zero, winds that can flip a helicopter, visibility measured in feet rather than miles. They map every glacier, every valley, every stand of trees big enough to hide a Cessna, not a scrap of metal, not a torn seat cushion, not a single piece of evidence. You'd think with all that manpower, all that technology, all that desperation, something would turn up. But Alaska's wilderness eats secrets for breakfast and asks for seconds. The terrain they're searching isn't just difficult, it's actively hostile. Glaciers shift and grind, burying evidence under tons of ice. Avalanches reshape mountainsides overnight. Rivers change course with the seasons. What you're looking for today might be buried under 50 feet of snow tomorrow. And then there's the scale. Picture flying from New York to Chicago, then imagine everything in between covered in mountains that dwarf the Rockies, glaciers older than human civilization, and forests so thick you can't see the ground from 500 feet up. That's what they're searching. Then the rumors start. In a state where conspiracy theories grow like mushrooms after rain, the disappearance becomes fertile ground for speculation. Sabotage? Did Boggs know too much? Was the pilot drunk? CIA involvement? KGB? Alien abduction? When you've got nothing but questions, every answer seems possible. The sabotage theory gains traction quickly. Someone planted a bomb on the plane. The timer was set to go off over the mountains, ensuring no recovery. The evidence? None. The motive? Take your pick. If you disappear in Alaska, people will invent stories to fill the silence. It's human nature, amplified by isolation and too much time to think. Some of those stories stick around longer than they should. Let me paint you a picture of Hale Boggs. The man was a political powerhouse, House Majority Leader, second in line to the Speaker, the kind of politician who shaped legislation with a phone call and a handshake. Born in Long Beach, California in 1914, but Louisiana through and through from the age of 1. He'd been serving Louisiana's 2nd congressional district since 1941, with only a brief interruption for World War II service in the Naval Reserve. This wasn't some backbench politician padding his resume. This was a man who helped shape the New Deal, who fought for civil rights when it wasn't popular in the South, who understood that politics was about power and how to use it. Boggs was part of the old guard, the kind of politician who made deals in smoke-filled rooms and kept his word once he gave it. He'd worked with every president since FDR, had been present at the creation of the modern Democratic Party, and knew where all the bodies were buried. He was charismatic in the way that only Southern politicians can be, smooth as bourbon, sharp as a straight razor, and not afraid to cut you if you crossed him. He'd tangled with J. Edgar Hoover publicly, calling the FBI director's tactics Gestapo-like in a speech that made headlines and enemies. More dangerously, he questioned the Warren Commission's findings on JFK, and he'd been on that commission. In 1971, he stood up in Congress and said the FBI had destroyed evidence, that the investigation was flawed, that the American people weren't getting the truth about their president's assassination. The kind of talk that made powerful people nervous, the kind of talk that, in the fevered imagination of conspiracy theorists, could get you killed. By 1972, Boggs was dealing with political pressure from multiple directions. The civil rights movement had fractured some of his Louisiana support base. Conservative Democrats thought he was too liberal. Liberal Democrats thought he wasn't liberal enough. His criticism of the FBI had made him enemies in law enforcement. His Warren Commission doubts had made him enemies in intelligence circles. Some say he was planning to reveal government secrets about surveillance programs when he returned to Washington. Others claim he was just a man trying to do his job in turbulent times, caught between the old politics and the new. What's certain is that he was tired. The job was wearing him down, the travel was killing him, and the pressure from all sides was relentless. At 58 he looked older. The stress was etched in his face, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. But he was still fighting, still pushing legislation, still making deals, still believing that politics could make the world better. That's why he was on that plane, not running from something, but running toward it. Nick Begich was Alaska's golden boy, young, ambitious, beloved by his constituents in a way that made other politicians jealous. Born in Eveleth, Minnesota in 1932, he'd moved to Alaska in the 1950s when it was still a territory, still wild, still full of possibilities. He taught school in Anchorage, got involved in local politics, and rode the wave of statehood all the way to Congress in 1970. At 40, he was the youngest member of Alaska's congressional delegation, and he was cruising to re-election with polls showing him ahead by 20 points. But Begich understood something that outside politicians didn't. You couldn't represent Alaska from a Washington office. You had to be out there in the villages on the ground, even if it meant flying in sketchy weather with questionable pilots. Alaska demanded that kind of commitment. His district was the entire state, 586,000 square miles of mountains, tundra, forests, and coastline. His constituents included Eskimo whalers in Barrow, oil workers in Prudhoe Bay, fishermen in Dutch Harbor, and gold miners in Fairbanks. The only way to reach them was by plane, and flying in Alaska meant accepting risks that would terrify pilots anywhere else. Begich's campaign was focused on Alaska's unique needs: oil development, native rights, federal land management, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. He understood that Alaska wasn't just another state. It was a different country with its own rules, its own culture, and its own dangers. He was also dealing with the complexities of native politics. The Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act had been signed into law in 1971, creating native corporations and redistributing land ownership. Begich supported the act, but implementation was messy, and not everyone was happy with the results. That October flight to Juneau, just another day at the office for an Alaska politician, another campaign stop, another speech, another chance to connect with voters who lived at the end of the world. He left behind a wife, Peggy, and 6 children. He was supposed to be home for dinner. He never made it. Pilot Don Johns was 38 years old, a veteran of Alaska, flying with more than 17,000 hours in the air. He'd been flying the state since the 1960s, knew every mountain pass and weather pattern, every airstrip and emergency landing site. but he also had a reputation for pushing limits. Other pilots called him aggressive, willing to fly in conditions that would ground more cautious aviators. He'd say, "We'll be fine," right before flying into a blizzard, and usually he was right. Usually. Johns flew for Pan-Alaska Airways, a charter service that specialized in the kind of flying that made insurance companies nervous. Politicians, businessmen, hunters, fishermen, anyone who needed to get somewhere fast and didn't mind taking risks. He knew the route from Anchorage to Juneau like the back of his hand. He'd flown it hundreds of times, in all kinds of weather, at all times of year. But Alaska flying in 1972 was different from anywhere else in the world. No radar coverage in most areas, no GPS, no satellite communication. You flew by sight, by instinct, and by sheer bloody-minded determination. When the weather closed in, you had two choices: turn back or push through. Johns had a reputation for pushing through. It had served him well for years, but it also meant he was willing to take risks that other pilots wouldn't. That morning, looking at the weather reports, he made his call. They'd fly. No flight plan filed, no emergency beacon, just confidence, a full tank of gas, and a pilot who believed he could handle whatever the sky threw at him. The fourth man on the plane was Russell Brown, Begich's aide and campaign manager. Brown was 37, a political operative who'd worked on campaigns across the country before settling in Alaska. He understood the stakes of this flight, not just getting to Juneau, but showing that Alaska politicians could handle Alaska conditions. Brown was the kind of guy who did the detail work that made campaigns successful. He scheduled events, managed logistics, dealt with the press, and made sure the candidate got where he needed to be. He was organized, efficient, and completely invisible to the public. But he was also a family man with a wife and children in Anchorage. He wasn't supposed to be on the plane that day. He'd volunteered to go at the last minute to help with the Juneau event, a decision that cost him his life. The morning of October 16th, the weather was marginal. The aviation weather report showed scattered clouds at 1,500 feet, broken clouds at 3,000 feet, visibility 5 miles in light rain and mist. Not great, not terrible, just marginal. In most places that would mean commercial flights would delay or cancel. In Alaska it meant you made a judgment call. The terrain was mountainous, the weather was changing, and the margin for error was thin. Johns made his call. They'd fly. He'd flown in worse conditions, knew the route, trusted his skills. What could go wrong? The takeoff from Anchorage was routine. The plane lifted off at 9 a.m., turned southeast toward the Chugach Mountains, and climbed to its cruising altitude of 8,000 feet. The passengers settled in for what should have been a routine flight. But routine doesn't exist in Alaska aviation. Every flight is a test, every landing a small victory, every safe arrival a minor miracle. The state has a saying, Alaska doesn't care about your schedule. 20 minutes into the flight, they hit the weather. Clouds, turbulence, icing conditions. The kind of weather that turns flying from transportation into survival. Ice forms on the wings, adding weight and changing the aerodynamics. The plane becomes sluggish, harder to control. Visibility drops to near zero. The mountains disappear into grey nothingness. Navigation becomes guesswork. This is when pilots earn their money and when some of them make their last mistakes. The search itself verged on chaos, but it was organized chaos. The Rescue Coordination Center at Elmendorf Air Force Base became the nerve center for the operation. Air Force officers, Coast Guard personnel, Civil Air Patrol volunteers, and civilian pilots all working together toward one goal: find the missing plane. The search area was divided into grids, each one assigned to specific aircraft and crews. They flew low and slow, scanning the terrain for any sign of wreckage. Helicopters checked mountain passes and valleys. Fixed-wing aircraft covered the broader areas. Aircraft crisscrossed the sky like a metallic swarm, each one carrying hope and expertise. Dogs sniffed the ground while their handlers trudged through snow and underbrush. Psychics phoned in claims that searchers followed up on, no matter how unlikely. At one point, they even deployed infrared cameras, cutting-edge technology at the time, mounted on military aircraft. The cameras could detect heat signatures, theoretically useful for finding survivors or wreckage. But the Alaska wilderness is full of heat signatures, animals, geothermal features, even sun-warmed rocks. The search crews worked in conditions that would challenge Arctic explorers. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Winds gusted to 60 miles per hour. Visibility was often measured in feet rather than miles. Several search aircraft had to make emergency landings. One helicopter crashed, though the crew survived. How can 4 people, a whole plane, just vanish? In Alaska, it happens with depressing regularity. The terrain swallows aircraft whole. A plane can hit a glacier and disappear under tons of ice. It can crash into a lake and sink without a trace. It can hit a mountainside and trigger an avalanche that buries everything. The Chugach Mountains are particularly treacherous. Glaciers fill the valleys, peaks rise to 13,000 feet, and the weather can change from clear to whiteout in minutes. It's the kind of terrain that makes pilots religious and sometimes makes them dead. Washington panicked when the news broke. The Speaker of the House, Carl Albert, demanded answers. The FBI got involved, treating the disappearance as a potential crime. Conspiracy theories bloomed like mold in a damp basement. The idea that 2 sitting congressmen could just vanish was unthinkable to people who lived in a world of security details and government jets. There had to be an explanation, a reason, someone to blame. But Alaska kept doing what it does best, keeping its secrets. The state had been hiding things for millennia: gold deposits, oil reserves, native burial grounds, the bones of failed expeditions. What was one more secret? The political ramifications were immediate. Both men were Democrats. Both were important to their party's legislative agenda. Boggs was expected to become Speaker of the House after the 1972 elections. Begich was seen as a rising star in Western politics. Their disappearance shifted the balance of power in Congress, changed the political landscape in Alaska and Louisiana, and left their families to navigate grief and politics simultaneously. Imagine you're a family member. Every phone call could be news. Every knock at the door could be closure or another dead end. Grief, hope, frustration, all tangled together like fishing line in a tackle box. Peggy Begich, Nick's wife, had to hold it together for their 6 children while dealing with reporters, politicians, and searchers. She became the face of the family's ordeal, maintaining hope while privately preparing for the worst. The children were ages 5 to 14, old enough to understand that Daddy was missing, too young to understand why. Every day without news was another day of uncertainty, another day of questions without answers. Lindy Boggs, Hale's wife, had her own political career to consider. She'd been active in Louisiana politics for years, had ghostwritten some of her husband's speeches, and knew she might have to step into his shoes if he was declared dead. The not knowing was torture. Was it quick? Did they suffer? Are they still alive somewhere, injured but unable to signal for help? Did they have time to think about their families? These questions haunted the families, and they haunted the searchers too. You don't get to move on. Not when there's no body, no grave, no explanation. There's no funeral, no closure, no final goodbye. Just empty chairs at the dinner table and questions that multiply like bacteria in a petri dish. Weeks passed, the search wound down, and the official story emerged: lost in the wilderness, presumed dead. The Coast Guard called off the active search after 39 days. The Civil Air Patrol continued volunteer flights for months. But the questions never stopped. Even decades later, hikers scanned the treetops for a glint of aluminum. Alaska is full of people who've spent their lives looking for that plane, convinced they'll be the ones to solve the mystery. The search became its own subculture. Pilots who flew extra routes hoping to spot wreckage. Hikers who carried cameras and GPS units documenting anything unusual. Conspiracy theorists who saw significance in every coincidence. So we circle the theories again. Pilot error, mechanical failure, weather, sabotage. Each one has its supporters, its evidence, its logical flaws. The pilot error theory suggests Johns got disoriented in the clouds and flew into a mountain. It's the most statistically likely explanation. Controlled flight into terrain accounts for most aviation accidents in Alaska. The mechanical failure theory points to the plane's age and the harsh conditions. Metal fatigue, engine failure, structural failure, all possibilities in a 15-year-old aircraft operating in extreme conditions. The weather theory says they hit unexpected turbulence, severe icing, or a downdraft that drove them into the ground. Alaska weather is notoriously unpredictable, and the mountains create their own meteorological chaos. But then there are the darker theories. Some insist Boggs was about to blow the whistle on government surveillance programs and the disappearance was no accident. Others claim the CIA was involved, that Boggs's criticism of the FBI had marked him for elimination. The assassination theory gained traction in the 1970s when faith in government was at a historic low. Watergate, Vietnam, the Pentagon Papers. Americans had learned not to trust official stories. If the government could lie about a war, why not about a plane crash? Some point to Boggs's Warren Commission doubts, suggesting he knew too much about the Kennedy assassination. Others focus on his FBI criticism, claiming J. Edgar Hoover had ordered his elimination. There's no proof for any of these theories, just shadows and speculation, coincidences and connections that may or may not mean anything. But in 1972, with the country convulsed by political scandal, anything seemed possible. Alaska is huge and hungry, and it's been eating people since the Ice Age. The state covers 663,300 square miles, bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. Most of it is wilderness, unchanged since the glaciers retreated. Planes crash here with depressing regularity. The Alaska Department of Transportation reports an average of 90 aviation accidents per year, with a fatality rate 6 times the national average. The weather flips in minutes, the terrain is unforgiving, and help is often hundreds of miles away. If you go down in Alaska, odds are you're not coming back. The state has swallowed expeditions, hunting parties, entire villages. The wilderness doesn't discriminate. It kills the experienced and the naive with equal efficiency. They call it the Alaska Triangle for a reason, the area between Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow, where more people vanish per capita than anywhere else in the U.S. Between 1988 and 2005, over 16,000 people disappeared in Alaska. Planes, hikers, hunters, fishermen, gone without a trace. It's like the Bermuda Triangle, but colder and with more bears. The combination of vast wilderness, extreme weather, and dangerous wildlife creates a perfect storm for disappearances. The statistics are staggering. Alaska has a missing person rate of 4.41 per 1,000 people, twice the national average. The state is so big, so wild, so empty that you can vanish into it like a drop of water into an ocean. Add in the fact that many areas have no cell service, no roads, no regular human presence, and you have a recipe for vanishing. Search and rescue resources are stretched thin across impossible distances. But tragedy did spark change. The disappearance of Boggs and Begich became a catalyst for aviation safety improvements that saved countless lives. Congress passed laws requiring emergency locator transmitters on small aircraft. The emergency locator transmitter, ELT requirement went into effect in 1973, just months after the disappearance. These devices automatically activate in a crash, sending out a signal that search teams can track. The technology wasn't perfect. Early ELTs had a high rate of false alarms and sometimes failed to activate in crashes, but they represented a significant improvement over the complete silence that had swallowed the Boggs-Begich flight. Search and rescue protocols were also improved. The Coast Guard and Air Force developed better coordination procedures, more sophisticated search patterns, and improved equipment for Arctic operations. Too late for Boggs and Begich maybe, but it saved lives for decades afterward. Sometimes, disaster is the only thing that gets Washington's attention. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that it took the disappearance of 2 congressmen to improve aviation safety for everyone else. As for the families, Lindy Boggs claimed her husband's House seat in a special election held in March 1973. She won with 81% of the vote, becoming the first woman elected to Congress from Louisiana. She went on to serve for 18 years, becoming a powerful figure in her own right. She pushed for women's rights legislation, civil rights protections, and government accountability, issues her husband had championed. In many ways, she became the politician he never got to be. She served on the Banking Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Select Committee on Assassinations. She was instrumental in passing the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and helped create the National Women's History Museum. When she retired from Congress in 1991, she was appointed ambassador to the Vatican, the first woman to hold that position. She died in 2013 at age 97, having lived long enough to see some of the changes she and her husband had fought for. Nick Begich's seat was filled by Republican Don Young, who went on to serve for 49 years, the longest tenure of any Republican in House history. Young's victory shifted Alaska politics rightward, a change that might not have happened if Begich had lived. Begich's son, Mark, grew up to become a U.S. Senator, serving Alaska from 2009 to 2015. He often spoke about his father's legacy and the impact of the disappearance on his family. Life moves forward even when the past refuses to let go, though every family gathering still holds an empty chair. The children grew up, had children of their own, and learned to live with the questions that would never be answered. The political impact was immediate and lasting. Alaska politics shifted without Begich's moderate Democratic voice. Louisiana lost one of its most effective congressmen. The House lost a potential speaker. The reverberations went far beyond 2 empty seats. Committee assignments changed, legislation was delayed or abandoned, and the balance of power in Congress shifted in ways that affected policy for years. 50 years on, we still don't know what happened. No wreckage, no remains, no answers, only questions that multiply like viruses in a host cell. Did they hit a glacier and disappear under tons of ice? Did the plane sink into a lake and get covered by sediment? Did they get caught in a downdraft and slam into a mountainside so hard that the wreckage scattered into pieces too small to find? Or did something else happen, something we'll never know? Did the plane disintegrate in midair? Did they crash into the ocean and sink in waters too deep to search? Did they hit a remote area and get covered by an avalanche? The theories have evolved over the decades, shaped by new technology, new evidence, and new ways of thinking about the disappearance. Some focus on the plane itself. Was it overloaded? Did it have mechanical problems? Was it properly maintained? Others look at the weather data, trying to reconstruct what conditions the plane encountered. Computer models, satellite imagery, and historical weather records have all been used to try to solve the puzzle. Still others examine the human factors. Was Johns tired, overconfident, pressured to fly despite the conditions? Did he make a navigation error? Did he ignore warning signs? 4 people vanished, families shattered, careers ended, and for them time froze on October 16, 1972. The world kept spinning, But in some corner of Alaska, a story stopped mid-sentence. The disappearance became a defining moment for Alaska, proof that the state could still kill you no matter how important you were, how much money you had, or how advanced your technology. It was a reminder that nature doesn't care about your schedule, your politics, or your ambitions. History doesn't always hand over answers. Sometimes it just hands you silence, and you have to learn to live with it. The idea that we can solve every mystery, explain every disappearance, find every missing person is a comforting fiction. Reality is messier, more uncertain, more frightening. Sometimes people just vanish, and all our technology and determination can't bring them back. And don't kid yourself that the modern world has fixed this problem. GPS, satellites, cell phones, emergency beacons. People still vanish, planes still disappear, and Alaska still kills the unwary. In 2019, a plane carrying 3 people disappeared near Juneau. In 2020, another plane vanished near Anchorage. In 2021, a survey aircraft with 2 people aboard was lost in the Brooks Range. Technology can't conquer nature or eliminate human error. We're not as safe, not as smart, not as in control as we like to think. The wilderness is still out there, still hungry, still patient, and sometimes it wins. The search for Boggs and Begich became a template for future searches, but it also revealed the limitations of search and rescue in a state as vast and unforgiving as Alaska. Even with unlimited resources and political pressure, sometimes the wilderness wins. Living without answers takes a toll that compounds over time. The mind fills gaps with nightmares, creates scenarios to explain the unexplainable. Every rumor becomes a possible truth, every sighting a potential breakthrough. Was it quick? Did they know what was happening? Did they have time to think about their families? Did they suffer? Are they still out there somewhere, frozen in the ice, waiting to be found? The families learned to live with uncertainty, but they never stopped hoping. Every few years, someone would claim to have found wreckage or a piece of the plane or evidence of what happened. Each time, hopes would rise, only to be dashed when the evidence turned out to be unrelated. It's not closure. It's a wound that never heals, a question that never gets answered, a story that never ends. Think of the searchers, the pilots, the volunteers, the officials risking their lives to look for people they'd never met. They flew in weather that grounded commercial flights, hiked through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers, and spent weeks in conditions that would break most people. They never found what they sought, but they kept going. Some became obsessed, spending years and fortunes searching for the plane. Others moved on but never forgot. A few made it their life's work, organizing expeditions and using new technology to continue the search. Sometimes searching is the only thing that makes sense. When you can't accept that someone is gone, when you can't believe the wilderness could swallow a plane whole, you keep looking. The search for Boggs and Begich became a crusade for some, a calling that lasted decades. Boggs and Begich are names on a plaque now, but their story altered aviation safety, reshaped families, and etched itself into Alaska's lore. The emergency locator transmitter requirement, the improved search and rescue protocols, the political changes in Alaska and Louisiana. History is what happened and what we remember and what we cannot forget. The disappearance became part of American mythology, a reminder that even in the modern world, some mysteries remain unsolved. But perhaps the most lasting impact is the mystery itself. The disappearance became part of Alaska's identity, proof that the state could still swallow people whole despite all our technology and confidence. It's a reminder that we're not as in control as we like to think. The case file remains open. The FBI, the Alaska State Troopers, and various private investigators continue to follow up on leads. Every few years, someone calls with a tip, a sighting, a theory. Most lead nowhere, but hope dies hard. Maybe someday a hiker will kick loose a piece of metal in the tundra, and the mystery will end. Maybe climate change will melt a glacier and reveal the wreckage. Maybe new technology, ground-penetrating radar, advanced sonar, satellite imagery will finally solve the puzzle. Or maybe Alaska will keep its secret the way it always has. Maybe the wilderness will never give up its dead, and the families will never get their answers. The search never really ended. It just evolved, became more sophisticated, more focused. Every few years, someone announces a new lead, a new theory, a new search. The families support some of these efforts, dismiss others, but they never stop hoping. Hope is all they have left, and sometimes it's enough. So what do we do with a story like this? We remember, we wonder, and we accept that sometimes the world is bigger and stranger than we can imagine. We honor the memory of 4 men who disappeared into the wilderness, and we acknowledge that some mysteries may never be solved. The disappearance of Boggs and Begich represents something uniquely American, the idea that you can vanish into the wilderness, that there are still places where nature is bigger than human ambition. It's both terrifying and oddly comforting. In a world where everything seems mapped, measured and monitored, Alaska reminds us that there are still blank spaces on the map, still places where people can disappear without a trace. It's a reminder of our place in the natural order, our vulnerability in the face of forces beyond our control. Remember that wind at the start? It's still out there, brushing across the mountains, whistling through the passes where a small plane might have struggled against the storm. Somewhere in the vast expanse of Alaska, it might still be rattling a piece of aluminum, half buried in snow, waiting for someone to find it. The wind carries stories, and this is one of them, a story of ambition and politics, of courage and tragedy, of questions that echo across generations. It's a story that refuses to end, that keeps pulling us back to that grey October morning when 4 men flew into history and never came back. History isn't neat, it's messy, unfinished, full of holes, but it's ours. The story of Boggs and Begich is a reminder that even in the modern world, even with all our technology and confidence, some things remain beyond our reach. The Alaska wilderness keeps its secrets. The families keep their hope, the searchers keep searching, and somewhere in the vast expanse of mountains and glaciers and forests, 4 men became part of the landscape they tried to cross. Their story is our story, a reminder that we're all passengers on a journey we can't control, flying through weather we can't predict, toward destinations we might never reach. But we keep flying anyway, because that's what humans do. We keep searching, keep hoping, keep believing that answers exist, even when they refuse to reveal themselves. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through this journey into one of America's most enduring mysteries. If you've got your own theory about what happened to Boggs and Begich, drop it in the comments. And if you're in Alaska, keep your eyes open. You never know what you'll find. Like and subscribe if you want more stories that refuse to stay buried, stories about the mysteries that shaped our world, the questions that still haunt us, and the people who disappeared into history. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. The wilderness is still out there, still patient, still hungry, and sometimes it wins.